Hey Waffle Gang, I do hope you're well. My name is Mark and today we're checking out some more Reddit stories, and if you do love a Reddit story, why not consider hitting that like, subscribe, maybe that notification bell too, and let's crack on with today's first story. Much love guys. Now today's first story comes from BarrowQueen1755 from the Am I Overreacting subreddit and says, Am I overreacting? My mother-in-law calls herself mummy to my daughter. My daughter is just over 3 months old. Occasionally my mother-in-law watches her when I have things to do or need a break. Lately she's been calling herself mummy when talking to my daughter. She does it in front of me and my husband at least once and sometimes more every time she visits now. And she always brushes it off like, whoopsie doodles, I'm so used to being mummy so I called myself that. Haha. But today she gave me reason to doubt that. I called her over to come watch the baby, but I took care of a house project that concerned chemicals. I took a shower afterwards because chemicals. I went downstairs to grab some fresh clothing out of the dryer when I heard my mother-in-law talking to my baby in the other room. And she called herself mummy 4 times in a 3-minute conversation. You want mummy to play with you? Are you having fun with mummy? Are you being a good girl for mummy? And mummy loves you? Yes, I do. She didn't know I was there, and she didn't even try to correct herself. I asked my husband to help me navigate the situation because it's super weird and frankly, I think unhealthy for my mother-in-law to be playing out this fantasy delusion. He said to me, if it really bothers you that much, we can say something next time we hear her do it. Which makes me wonder if I'm making a bigger deal out of this than it should be. But it feels like a big fucking deal. Am I overreacting? So, in the comments on this one, Anne Bonnell says, no, you're not overreacting. I would not let my mother-in-law babysit anymore. Your mother-in-law probably wants a do-over child. You also have a husband problem, albeit a mild one. He needs to talk to his mother and tell her to stop calling herself mummy to your child. Opie says, I've thought the same thing about the do-over baby. My mother-in-law lost her own daughter at 4 weeks old due to SIDS almost 40 years ago. SIDS is sudden infant death syndrome, and on Google it says it's sometimes known as cot death. That's from the NHS website, by the way. Neither she nor my husband want to unpack that trauma, but I think this might be the start of a super scary path, and I'm worried that my husband is turning a blind eye because he doesn't want to deal with it. Calica Spark says, I would have shut that down immediately upon the first slip. I intentionally asked my mother and the mother-in-law which grandma name they wanted to be called for clarity before they ever met our little one. Opie says, we actually did all these things. During my pregnancy, my mother-in-law decided that she wanted to be called Lala by the baby. I asked her to pick a different name because it felt too similar to Mama for me to be comfortable with it, especially because L sounds are really difficult for babies to say. Honestly, I could smell this shit coming from a mile away. My husband said I was being ridiculous, but he stood by what I wanted and urged her to pick a different name. Ultimately, she chose Grammy. The first time I heard her call herself mummy to my daughter, I said something along the lines of, excuse me, who are you again? And mother-in-law laughed it off with a whoopsie doodle, and I drove the point home with another comment along the lines of, you sure as hell ain't mummy. I caught some side-eye for that one. I was definitely being snarky. Anyway, we've tried all these things, and it's possibly why my husband is just starting to ignore it. I think he might be burnt out on the subject and over it, but I feel like if I let up on this, it will progressively get worse because that's the only way it's gone so far, with mother-in-law continuing to push the edge of the envelope with what she can get away with. Opie shares another comment regarding her mother-in-law and more details on the background of losing her daughter at 4 weeks old, and Opie says, you've hit on a lot of points here that I'm worried about too. She was a teenager when she had her daughter, and that baby died at 4 weeks old from SIDS. 10 years later, she had my husband. In the years between, instead of grieving and going to counseling, she essentially drug binged for a decade. I do worry that she has a festering mental illness triggered by the birth of my daughter, like she's trying to use my daughter as a replacement for the daughter that she lost 40 years ago. Anyway, though whenever I bring it up, I feel crazy and my husband thinks she wouldn't do that, but then an issue like this crops up. I can't help but feel validated in my suspicion. Opie on if her mother-in-law is married and why her husband's not involved. Opie says she is not married. She's been a single mother to my husband his whole life. Commenter says, what does your husband call her? Opie says he calls her by her first name, and he has since he was 11. He told me that she ignored him more when he called her mum or any variation, and she was much more responsive when he addressed her by her first name. He even corroborated this in the past, that he had so many questions as a kid that she learned to tune out the word mum by default. Kinda makes her claim less believable, right? And I totally agree with OP in this situation. Again, maybe read one too many Reddit stories, but this is definitely going down a very concerning path for me that, she's secretly saying this, and it feels like she's pushing the mummy thing constantly, like saying it that many times, those sentences within a couple of minute conversation, with no concern for the future of this as well, because clearly her saying mummy to this child and eventually the child's going to start saying it back is unsustainable. The parents are always going to find out at some point, and this is going to explode. Mother-in-law already knows OP is against it. She already seems to got one over the husband on this because he's just seemed to have tuned out of it, which is concerning in itself. But this definitely feels a low contact or even further situation, maybe until she gets some help and proves that she's getting some help. Obviously, this could be to do with her losing a child at 4 weeks old, which is horrific, and I absolutely feel for anyone who's lost a child because, that's heartbreaking. Or is it to do with her tuning the husband out when he was a child, only responding to him when he said her first name, so now she wants to redo that situation all over again? But it definitely feels like a low contact situation because nothing's going to change unless she gets some form of help. Like you said, she's going to continue to push boundaries here and potentially escalate, which is scary. Opie comes in and updates the post and says, "We maybe got a resolution to the problem in a roundabout way. Mother-in-law hasn't spoken to us since this morning though, so we have to see how the dust winds up settling. Sorry this update has wound up really long. We had mother-in-law over for 4th of July. We'd made plans a while ago for me to cook dinner for the holiday. I spoke with my husband the day before and let him know that I wasn't pleased with mother-in-law stomping all over the parenting boundaries, including but not limited to the mummy problem. I brought up many points that you all gave me, so thank you everyone who commented. I'd let him know that I was planning to say something while she was with us and I was on high alert for most of the day. There's some necessary backstory before I get into what went down. We have a rule for our mother-in-law concerning our daughter. Mother-in-law is not allowed to take pictures of the baby on her phone. We also don't send pictures of the baby to her phone through text or email. My mother-in-law is one of those people who posts every tiny detail of her life to her friends on Facebook, and she has a nasty habit of posting unflattering photos of me, and she and her friends criticize the way I look. God, dearie me. She also uses big moments in my life to get attention from her friends and family. She's really addicted to the adoration. My husband and I decided early on that we did not want our daughter included in what happens on her wall with her friends, from a consent standpoint, but also to help set up our daughter to be far away from social media for mental health reasons. I know that's a problem that's far off in the future, but we feel it's important to protect her even now. Mother-in-law literally cannot stop herself from immediately sharing a photo she takes with her Facebook friends, so we just decided no photos on her phone, period. We even bought a really high-end camera for ourselves that we allow her to use, which prevents her from sharing but still allows her to take pictures. For the record, we have provided her a photo album with physical copies of baby pictures, and we add to it all the time. Anyway, yesterday mother-in-law decided to break the rule. The camera was in reach for her to use and she deliberately chose the phone instead. She thought she was being sneaky and tried to look like she was texting, but started snapping pictures of our daughter. I happened to be looking over her shoulder and I caught her red-handed. I asked her to stop taking pictures and delete the ones she'd already taken. She told me that the pictures were just for her to have on her phone, but I saw her start clicking on the share buttons and she scrolled over to the Facebook icon. She suddenly realized that I was still looking at her phone while she was doing it, so she backed out of everything and locked her phone screen. I called her out and said, "You were literally about to share the picture. I watched you almost do it." And she went off. She started yelling that she sees my husband take pictures of the baby all the time on his phone. That is not fair that she can't take pictures on her phone and that we're being hypocrites. My husband at that point stepped in and qualified that he, as the baby's father, has different rules where he can take pictures on his phone. She started whining and called herself an equal partner who can take pictures of the baby if she wants to, and again called us hypocrites. I told her very specifically that she is in fact not an equal partner and she needs to abide by our rules. She pushed further and said that she should be an equal partner. I think she is helping to raise the baby and that we need to see that she should be able to do what she wants. That's where I had it. I said, "Mother-in-law, you are not baby's mother. You are not her parent and you are not an equal partner. You're a grandmother, and that means you will follow our rules because we are her parents and what we say goes." She started laughing at me, very derisive kind of laughing. I just picked up my daughter and said, "You're laughing like it's a joke, but it's not," and walked out the room. The night ended pretty poorly. This morning, mother-in-law called us to invite us out to brunch. My husband thought that maybe she wanted to extend an olive branch and make amends. So we took her up on her offer. Brunch went well, we were all seemingly getting along, but then as we were finishing up, my mother-in-law brought up that she took some great photos the night before and couldn't wait to share them with her friends. My husband didn't miss a beat and he said, "Mother-in-law's name, why are you still trying to buck against my rules?" Once again, she called us hypocrites and said that she's offended that we don't trust her and doesn't feel like she deserves to be punished when all she wants to do is have pictures of our baby. My husband pointed out that we can't trust her because she keeps trying to subvert our rules and continues to undermine us as parents. And if she can't fall in line, then we're going to have a serious problem going forward. She stood up from the table, announced that we'll have to accept that we disagree on this, and she refuses to talk about it any further, and stormed out the restaurant. That's everything up until now. We haven't heard from her since she stormed out. Normally she calls my husband about 3 times a day, so we're pretty sure that she's really mad. My husband and I discussed how we're going to go forward from this, and we are resolute that if she cannot figure out how to stay out of parenting our baby, then she simply won't see the baby at all. I so appreciate how he has decided to put his foot down and help me put mother-in-law in her place because you all were right. She's really gotten out of control and seems to legitimately think that she is a third parent to my daughter. I also appreciate everyone who had something to say on my last post. You all gave me a lot of tools to show my husband that what is happening here is not acceptable, and that if we take a back seat, she's going to happily push us out of our roles entirely. That's all for now. I'll update again if there ends up being anything new to share. So there were some more relevant comments that Opie was responding to. So Dog Living says, "Stop giving her printed pictures too. She can scan them or just take photos of them and share from that." Opie says, "Honestly, I agree, and we might stop given the circumstances. But initially the idea was that we weren't trying to prevent her from having pictures. We were just trying to make it harder for her to post stuff and hopefully discourage her. We will probably reevaluate, and meanwhile, nobody can say we didn't try to compromise." Hurricane Aura says, "Tell her if she is with your baby, she has to relinquish her phone. Put it somewhere safe until she leaves. She can participate in family gatherings, but the phone stays locked away until she goes home." Opie says, "My husband was thinking a phone jammer, but I'm not sure if that prevents camera use. I think this idea is better. In the meantime though, we're planning to not see her for a while, and I hope a really long while. We have even jokingly talked about moving across the country again, which sounds ridiculous, but we've done it before with less." Opie on the reason why her husband called his mother by her first name and not mum. Opie says, "Yeah, there is. The story, as I've heard it from both mother-in-law and husband, that husband asked so many questions as a little kid that mother-in-law became numb to the word mum. She began ignoring him, and when he called her that, so at the ripe old age of 11, my husband started calling her by name. Evidently, she is much more responsive to being addressed by name than she ever was being called mum, so it's stuck." Opie on mother-in-law's thoughts of a nickname from her granddaughter and says, "She settled on Grammy to my face, but then she just cut out the middleman and went straight to calling herself Mummy to my daughter when I wasn't around. And honestly, when I was around too. Concerning the Lala thing, I was always worried that behind my back she would call herself Mama to the baby and then use the Lala thing as almost a smokescreen because the two are so close. I thought that she would probably encourage mispronunciation as soon as possible, and it would eventually get to the point of, well, that's what the baby is calling me, so I guess I'm Mama now. At the time, my husband thought I was being ridiculous, but even now I don't think I was. I asked that she pick a different name that couldn't accidentally turn into Mama, so I would know for sure that she'd been training my kid to call her that and couldn't blame it on the baby mixing up words and sounds. Now in the update, like, something jumped out to me, and maybe I just didn't have that kind of relationship with my parents, but mother-in-law calling husband up 3 times a day. I was like, what? Normal? I might get some hate for that one, but I have to ask the question because I certainly didn't have that kind of relationship. But I'm glad that husband is started backing you up on this because, it's definitely 100% getting out of hand here. Or is out of hand, was out of hand a long time ago. And, I wouldn't even consider thinking about phone jammers and that sort of stuff. I'd be absolutely, that phone is not entering this house. Well, I don't think she should be entering the house, to be quite honest. I definitely think it's a low contact scenario until she starts spitting some truths or getting some help, something along those lines about what is exactly going on, because she's considering herself equal in this parenting role, calling herself mum. It's gone wild. And it definitely feels like to me that somewhere along the line, she's not mentally well. Maybe what happened in her past, etc. No excuses. I still think it's a low contact or maybe even no contact situation until she gets that help because, I just feel like this could escalate further and further. But now I'm going to turn this one to you guys. What do you guys make of this situation? What would you advise to OP? Let us know your thoughts down in the comments below. And let's move on to another story. Now, our next story comes from the Am I the Arsehole subreddit. No update is yet from Impressive Till 2180 and says, Am I the arsehole? My son came out as gay and I said, hell yeah, bud. Hello all, I'm not sure what to do, but I think I messed up. Yesterday, my son, 15, asked my wife and I to talk and said it was important. I wasn't sure what he wanted to say, but I am a nervous person by nature and was anticipating the worst. My main concern was that he was going to say he wanted to join the military. Now, there is nothing wrong with serving in the armed forces. I did it myself, but I experienced a lot of traumatic things while in, and I just don't want that for my kids. So my first thought was that he was going to tell us he decided to join the army or something, and the thought kind of panicked me. So to get back to what actually happened, he had us come into his room and was looking really nervous. He took a deep breath and said, Mum, Dad, I just wanted to let you know that I'm gay. I hope this doesn't change anything about our relationship. Now, first off, I have no idea why he was worried. We're pretty progressive in our house, but it took him by surprise when I shouted, hell yeah, bud. Oh, thank God. I immediately noticed he looked kind of weirded out, so I tried to salvage it by saying, go on with your bad self, and offering a fist bump that he did not bump back. My wife was much more collected than me, and she just said that of course we love him and this doesn't change anything and would love to meet any future boyfriends, which I was quick to agree with. He hasn't been talking to me much today and is giving me one-word answers when we usually have really good conversations. How bad did I screw up his coming out? Is there any way I can make it up to him? Oh, that's a tricky situation. It's no one's the arsehole here or not the arsehole here from me. You're clearly supportive of your son and, I feel that's the main thing in this story, but trying to think of it from your son's side, 15 years old, all these feelings and thoughts and, what your parents are going to think about you, how your parents are going to react and think about you. It's got to be really scary. And he's probably got a million and one different scenarios in his head. So when this came out, he might have just been shocked from the reaction and didn't know how to react himself, expecting something completely different. Again, I don't know. It's just what's going through my head and trying to put myself in that situation. I obviously can't know 100%. I've never been in that situation. I'm sure many people in the comments will share their own experiences, which will be far more insightful than my thoughts. But all I can say is sit your son down again and explain exactly that you sin here, your worries, your panic about your experience with the armed forces, and that's what you was worried about. So it was just a big relief for you. And just let him know in a far more collected way that you do support him, that you love him for who he is and you support him. But Kimber the Tabby Lion says, this is now my second favorite coming out to parents story. My favorite will remain friend's teenage son who spoke to her one day. I just told dad I'm gay and he's fine with it. He responded, I'm so happy, darling. Are you planning to come out to me anytime soon? Apparently, he was so confident she'd be accepting. She was, that he never actually had the conversation. Not the arsehole, but you should probably explain your reaction to him. Another commenter says, this is so much more wholesome than it could have been. No one's an arsehole here. Your son is just feeling awkward by virtue of it being a charged subject. If you're worried, you could tell him or have your wife tell him that you were just worried he had bad news to share, but I wouldn't worry about it too much. Tripping Fingers says no one's an arsehole here. He was probably expecting it to be a big deal, like maybe he thought you were going to be mad and now he's recovering, or he thought you were going to celebrate his bravery and now all his psyching himself up feels like a letdown. Maybe he's confused and thought you were being sarcastic. Worth talking to him about, but nobody here was an arsehole. Short Step says no one's an arsehole here. Honestly, this was such a dad reaction. If you're not making your teenager cringe, what are you even doing? Maybe follow up with him and let him know that you were worried about bad news and thank him for sharing something so personal with you. Then you should probably have an updated sex talk about how important protection and consent are, even if there's no risk of pregnancy. One more comment from Echo Lawrence who says, bless you. No one's an arsehole here. He's probably been terrified about coming out, and if he's been questioning, maybe he misinterpreted your thank God as we knew all along, you're finally admitted it, which might make him feel very self-conscious. Best thing you can do is give him some space. Let him know you're willing to talk in full when he's ready, and just make sure he knows you are there for him. Now, I'm going to turn this one to you guys. What do you guys make of this situation? Let us know your thoughts down in the comments below. Just a huge thank you from the bottom of my heart for getting involved in today's stories. Your love, your support, your time always means the absolute world to me. And don't forget, at the very end of the video, there'll be a couple of playlists there that you can click on and it will automatically scroll through all the videos for you. So whatever you're up to, maybe you're doing a bit of crochet today. Maybe you're just out on a bike ride. Let me know what you're up to, by the way, at Mark Narrations over on Twitter. I love to hear what you're up to whilst you're listening. And hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Take care and much love.